Okay, I want to talk about generations and values here. I believe the best way to prepare for the future is learning the values of the generations who are on a precipice of assuming positions of power. So, what's so magical about values themselves? I believe we come to a point in our society where we we have distinct value systems of each generation, and they're having a larger role than they ever have in the past. Our institutions, organizations, culture at large have been taking on the predominant values of the generations themselves. So it is something very important, in my opinion. I also believe that the values of the generation, of the millennial generation, when we take a good look, it's a pretty historically healthy view of the world. Um, they're they're nice people. They have meaning. They're helpful. They seem to be pretty good people. However, they have um, a bad reputation. It seems, and I don't think it's their fault. I think it's a misrepresentation. Um, we talk about narcissism, entitlement. Everyone gets a trophy. Um, they're not hard workers. Um, I I do intend to address that in the future, and I think that's really far off. It's just a bad rap they're getting. So I want to stick with the. Let's before we talk about the millennials, I want to go back to the boomers. They came of age, or at least they were born in the modern world where the the major theme of culture at large was still optimism. So the boomers grew up in a pretty optimistic age, and since that time, we've had the baby boomers and Gen Xers prior to the millennials. And baby boomers, if you don't know, they were born roughly 1945 to 1965. Gen Xers born roughly 1965 to 1980. Um, in since the boomers were born, we left the rational world. We've entered the postmodern, and we had two alternatives to rational thought on a grand level, and that's been nihilism and ideology. And if you're going to broadly label some issues that the boomers have, they're ideological. They had litmus tests early on in their lives of civil rights, Vietnam, where they were required to take sides on issues that perhaps young generations didn't before. It was a cultural revolution, and this caused them to pick a side, and it formed their ideology early on. The Generation X, they were a little bit more cynical, had a little more despair. Um, they they saw Watergate early in their lives. They saw the stagflation of the 1970s as children, where perhaps their two parents were working. They were left to their own devices more than generations before them. So it was a post-industrial economy had started, and they were questioning um, the future itself. So that's where we get the nihilism and the cynicism. So these two things, these two ideas, really define our two previous generations to the millennials, and it's not clear thinking. Alvin Toffler wrote Future Shock in 1970. He was it's futurology, and what that is, if you're not familiar with it, it's using statistics, predictive analytics to assess what may be in the future. It was never required before. It's basically a social science using sort of mathematics and it's multidisciplinary, but it even uses a little bit of science fiction. So we never required futurology because things didn't move fast enough. So now that we really need to be prepared for the future, we started introducing some of these types of things. He said things are going to be going really quick here really soon, and I'm not sure that we're prepared for it. So that's Alvin Toffler in 1970. So from that perspective, the postmodern, specifically talking about the 1970s, was a sort of a cultural trauma that it changed the baseline consciousness of the boomer generation and the Gen X generation. The objective realities had dissipated because of the new psychological requirements required to exist. It was a new time. It was a new cultural period. The deepest value in the modern world was progress. It was always moving forward, always looking for what's next. The postmodern, the primary question was, is progress even attainable anymore? So it questioned the idea of progress. The Metamodern says, are there things that we can learn from the postmodern? And the answer is yes. And it says, are there things that we can learn from the postmodern? And the answer is yes. So we can't lose track of history, the pre postmodern, but we also need to understand that there's some ideas in the postmodern that we can use to move forward as well. And in the postmodern, we weren't recognizing that. Postmodern was really about stirring in the present, not understanding the requirements to look forward or to look to the future, look to the past or look to the future. So that's why I view the metamodern as a more healthy period of humanity. We're thinking about the past, we're learning from the past, but we're also moving forward, which is always the ideal. And the main point is that the millennial generation has access to the metamodern better than any other generation alive. They grew up mostly they came of age in the metamodern world, so that they access it better than everybody else. And I think that is an important idea to understand. It's really an opportunity to understand the present even that much better by contemplating their values formed completely in this era, and then with that we can predict a lot better than throwing all these confusing cultural eras together. And it's a more clear picture of what we need to do. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'll move forward with another topic. Thanks.